Very good. We might as well start. The mics are doing the rounds, and I'll take questions from all of those who want to ask questions. Hands up.
Thank you, Judge. I am the facilitator for Table 2. The members of the table have 2 points here. The first one, they'd like to ask the panel, do we need new legislation to encourage employers to stop the discrimination of older people? And how would you suggest incentivising employers? It was suggested by a member to possibly look at a grant system like the ones that are in place for employing people with disabilities. A case study was highlighted of the Employability Office in the social welfare system, which from the members' knowledge seems to offer supports to both the employer and employees. It was also highlighted by a member recognition for carers and stamps that should be allocated to them for their contribution, and it was highlighted in relation to carers that have done like the likes of FETAC courses or done courses in caring, and they should get stamps for their contribution. It was also asked by a member in relation to 0-hour contracts, and if the lower rate of PRSI was eliminated, which is paid by employers, would this give people more opportunity to work?
All right. In fact, we may be straying a little bit outside the topic here. Isha, would you like to deal with them? And if you feel that they've gone beyond what's represented by the topic.
Yeah, fine. I'll just address the question of the legislation to stop discrimination. There is legislation, as was already outlined by Emily Logan, which outlaws discrimination on the basis of age. But the vast majority of age limits are in contracts. And in order to, wearing my lawyer hat, it would be extremely difficult to have legislation that prevented people entering into contracts that had particular provisions. So, for instance, employers would have to be free, I think, to employ people on the basis of, let's say, a 10-year contract or a 7-year contract or whatever. You could, I imagine, make legislation that would, prevent the inclusion of an absolute limit on employment, but nevertheless they could be got around by having fixed-term contracts and all the other things. So it would be quite difficult to prevent it because it is a matter largely of contract. Encouragement, I think, is probably the better way. And in many ways, the best way to do it would be if and maybe the voluntary organisations should consider doing this, it would be to show the contribution that older workers make in particular areas. Personally, I wouldn't favour greatly an incentive scheme such as exists for people with disabilities. The incentive schemes that exist for employers to take on people with disabilities are designed to overcome the very specific barriers that people with disabilities face. For example, wheelchair access and dedicated IT systems and all that sort of thing. I don't think it would be good to have, if you like, to say that older people getting back to work were in the same category as people with disabilities, because they're not. They don't have disabilities, most of them. So I wouldn't be personally a fan. Now, other people have different views, but I personally wouldn't be a great fan of an incentive system. I think it's much more encouragement on the basis of evidence that older people are making a significant contribution in the areas in which they are engaged. If you don't mind, Judge, I just address that question of the carers and the PRSI.
If you would, please. Yes.
Because I think the issue got a little bit confused at the last session. There are 2 ways in which carers come into the PRSI system or are affected by the PRSI system. They talked about the homemaker scheme, and that's a scheme whereby, as Mary Murphy explained at the time, if you stay at home to look after your children or to look after your elderly parent or whatever, those years can be discounted in effect when they're measuring the average. If, however, you qualify for a carer's allowance from the Department of Social Protection, and obviously your average mother does not because the child doesn't have a disability, so they don't get a carer's allowance. But if you do qualify because you're looking after a person with a disability, you do get credits in that instance. So a person who has been a carer, who previously had some paid contributions, then becomes a carer and gets carer's allowance, or indeed carer's benefit. that person will get credits for the time they spent caring. So they will qualify assuming that they get other contributions later on, they will qualify for a state pension.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And are you clear on that? The difference between the two bases.
Systems, yeah.
One is the homemakers allowance, which came in 1994.
That's right.
Yeah, and it means you don't have to divide by the number of years from the day you started your employment. Maybe could be as far back as 1970.
Yes, yes, indeed. I mean, this whole area of how exactly you qualify for state pension is extremely complex. Yeah. There's no, and I'm not sure that this is the best area in which to be explaining it, because it is extremely complex and depends very much on personal circumstances. But if you want more information about it, I'm going to straightforwardly plug the Citizens Information Database, citizensinformation.ie, which gives a very good description of exactly who gets credits and who gets homemakers allowances. So you can find it there.
Yeah, and the carers allowance
as well. And the carers allowance as well, yes. Yeah. I did mention I was the chair of the Citizens Information Board, didn't I? Yes, good.
So it's citizensinformation.ie.
That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, that is very enlightening, that is very helpful.
Judge, I'm the facilitator at table 12, and one of the citizens has the following question for item Mangan. As there are numerous different volunteer groups vying for the same functions and funding, would you have any recommendations on how to coordinate these groups?
Yeah. Well, as you're quite correct, there are numerous people looking for volunteers, but I think there are still, the pool of volunteers that is potentially available is still quite large. So I think there is a group called Volunteering Ireland which does attempt to coordinate these, and you can register with them as having an interest in caring, or in volunteering, I beg your pardon. But I'm not sure how, I just don't know enough about it now to answer you completely. I don't know how extensively their network extends. But there's no doubt that any local social service organisation would be able to tell you what areas volunteers were needed in the area. The new older people's councils that the local authorities are establishing, they should be able to help with that as well. But further coordination, I'm not sure is going to be possible, because all these organisations want to pick their own volunteers. And volunteers, for example, who want to work in, I'll take Citizens Information Centres, for instance, they need different, the requirements there are different from, say, volunteering to do Meals on Wheels or whatever. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that they're better or worse, they're just different. And it's quite hard it's an individual thing to fix, to match, if you like, a person with a volunteer role. So it would be very difficult to have a total coordinated effort. But Volunteering Ireland does make an attempt in that area.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm facilitator on table 14, and they've asked me to read out the following statement on their behalf. Why have we been asked as citizens to come up with proposals for the Oireachtas on the challenges and opportunities of the older person, when there are many policies already written which have not been implemented and should have been, i.e. Positive Ageing Strategy 2013? If the policymakers would stop sitting on their hands and go ahead and implement instead of asking for our recommendations, we'd be better off, and it would show genuine concern and interest on their behalf instead of lip service.
Yeah. Just before we go further, just to tell you, we're going to put the National Positive Ageing Strategy on the website. In fact, it's already on our website, if anybody wants to have a look at it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm the facilitator for table number 6, and we have one recommendation and one question. The recommendation would be that management of public environment areas and, say, towns and villages to meet the requirements and think about it for the elderly people, such as, say, the timing of traffic lights, seating in public areas where people are going for a walk, may like to sit down and rest and maybe meet other people, that they should be considered to a greater extent. And the question would be, should we have a minister plus department for the elderly, which would lead the way in income, health and welfare, where they have the responsibility to promote and implement being the main one, the policy, and also for the awareness campaign on how to gain access and information on services and resources available.
Yeah. Well, we discussed, you may remember, we discussed the traffic lights on the last occasion, and I think there's a genuine point there, because when I had been coming out to Malahide on the last occasion, I think it was in Drumcondra, and the traffic lights were red, and there was a woman going across, and she barely made it to the other side. I mean, the traffic lights do need looking at, and I mean, it's a nice point that there should be public seats for elderly people in public areas. That is a nice point. We can consider that tomorrow in terms of the ballot paper. Do either of our speakers think that there would be a benefit in having a separate department for the elderly?
Well, sorry, do you want to take it? We have this, well, we're back to the Constitution. We can only have 15 ministers.
Yeah.
So if we have a separate minister for older people, then we have to drop some other minister. We do at present, as you know, have a separate Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, which was an innovation in 2011. Yeah. There is no doubt that having having a champion at cabinet level means that your cause is heard much better than if there isn't a champion at cabinet level. But I'm not sure how you could. I'm not sure which minister you would drop in order to have a minister for older people. Yeah. And I also am not sure that, I mean, the Department of Social Protection are the people who pay the pensions, and they are pretty well organised in so doing. What would be good, I think, is if the Minister of State at the Department of Health with responsibility for older people actually had responsibility, because he doesn't, and nor did any of his predecessors. In order to have actual responsibility, the Minister has to make an order devolving responsibility to the Minister of State, and more often than not they don't do that, so that the Minister of State is actually a figurehead type figure rather than somebody with actual powers to implement the areas in which they're involved. I wouldn't have an objection to having a Minister for older people, but as I say, I just don't know where I'd have an objection to increasing the number of ministers. So I don't know where. I don't know who we drop. Is what I'm saying in the.
Yeah. And of course, the Department of Health and, as you say, the Department of Social Protection are involved.
They are, yes,
particularly,
yeah.
And possibly Justice. Maybe Justice have some involvement.
Yeah. Not well in safeguarding and things like that. Yes, but not. It's really health and social protection.
I'd just like to add, the thing about the traffic lights, I don't know if you're aware, but in Tilda we actually measured the speed that people walk.
Did you?
Yeah, and we know they do the traffic lights. They're set, the sort of amber light is set at 1.2 metres per second. That's the speed you have to walk at. And what we did was we calculated what speed people actually do walk at by age. And we came up with this sort of sliding scale, and we know that if you think about the amber light, so to get across that final bit of the road, 40% of people aged over 65 don't have enough time based on the speed that they walk at. And if you're doing a dual task, if you're walking and doing something else, we have a cognitive task in Tilda where we test people. They have to do every other number, but there's other, just think you're walking with a bag. It goes right up to 70% of people aged over 65 don't have enough time to cross on those lights. But we worked with Dublin City Council, and they said going forward they were going to start rounding up rather than rounding down on the distance so as to change the speed of the lights. And they talked about their engineers working on the road flow and trying to think about those traffic lights where there's much more older people, that they could lengthen the time on some of those. But that's a report that it's on our website, but I'd be happy to show. And it's available, but I can email it maybe to Sharon so that you can see.
That would be very helpful. And when was the discussion with Dublin City Council?
This was last year, early last year it would have been.
Oh, right.
So, they have all of the data, but obviously it's throughout the country that should be considered.
But I must say, one does observe it as one is driving along. That's very helpful, thank you. Anybody else? But that's... There will definitely be a blue moon tonight. Well, listen, we've had a very, very long day. I mean, I think... Oh, yeah. I spoke too soon.
Judge,
Yeah.
the citizens at table 5 just want to make a point. They say that they're very concerned at the lack of action when the reports are given to the various authorities.
Yeah, yeah,
That's all.
yeah. So once again, we're into implementation territory. Yeah, I mean, it is the word that emerges from today, implementation. All right. In any event, as I was just saying, we have had a very long day. We've been at it for 8 hours or something, and we've been very fortunate. We've had so many interesting presentations, and I want to once again thank Isha and thank Christina and all the other speakers. I mean, we have great papers, and again, and you bear with me, I do want you to remember that you have the papers and to consult them if necessary. We've been working on the ballot paper. We've received some feedback. We are going to do some more work just now, and we'll discuss it with you tomorrow. And we'll start tomorrow at 9:15, as you know, and I hope you have a pleasant evening. We deserve to have a bit of fun this evening, I think, and we'll meet at 6:45 in the Griffin Bar. Thank you very much.